All right, and we're back. Thank you for joining me today as we discuss Job chapter 5 from the King James Version of the Bible. My friend Jane is joining us. And if I could briefly recapitulate what has occurred so far in the narrative, right? We have Job, the perfectly just and righteous man who finds himself at the center of a wager. I'm grossly oversimplifying it, between God and Satan over whether or not Job will continue in his dutiful service to God even after everything that he treasures is taken away from him, all possessions, including his children. And we've learned a lot about the dynamic between Satan and God and the leash that God seems to have Satan upon. All of this short synopsis is not uncontroversial. And I'm only merely including it to bring others up to date. If you want to know what I have found or discovered or my thoughts on these first 5 chapters, you can join the playlist that this video, this podcast is going to be part of. And before we get into this line-by-line analysis of chapter 5, I guess I would ask Jane, is there anything that you would like to say here at the outset?
No, it's an honor to be here, and thank you for inviting me. This is going to be a fun task, and I've enjoyed following along, so thank you.
All right. I couldn't possibly do the first 4 chapters justice in the little bit of a summary that I gave there, but I think it's enough of an orientation if you've never read the book of Job before. So, Jane, I think the way you're the first person I've ever done this back and forth with, studying the King James Version of the Bible in this way. I think we'll just go line by line and just interject if you want to respond to something that I have said, or if you have your own commentary that you want the listeners to know about.
That sounds great.
Okay, so here we go. Yeah. Call now, if there be any that will answer thee, and to which of the saints wilt thou turn? Now, I made a note here. The concept of saints is not an uncontroversial one in Christianity. And so I wanted to really understand what this term meant. And by just skimming the most popular commentaries, there appears to be some disagreement about who the saints are that are referenced here. And there are 2 groups that the thinking tends to coalesce in. And I include this from the Jameson Fawcett Brown Bible commentary, where he says, or they say, the saints are either, 1, the angels who are sometimes called saints because they are eminently and perfectly holy, or rather, and then the second group, holy men, as appears both from the word which most commonly is so used and from the opposition of the foolish man to these, and because the example of men was more proper and effectual for Job's conviction than of angels. So, and I wrote here, I think Eliphaz's point here is to see if Job understands that no angel will hear his complaint or relay his predicament to God.
No, I think the comment on the saints is interesting. I hadn't picked up on that, and I didn't know that there were 2 schools of thought there, because I think I had assumed, along with I think a lot of the prevailing and some of the older commentarians, that they were sort of alluding to the heavenly hosts, and the reason that they put forth is the context in which verse 1 occurs, right? Which is right after this, it comes on the heels of Eliphaz from chapter 4, if anyone's listened to your commentary on chapter 4, but on the heels of this supernatural vision that he has. And we don't really know if it's from God or if it's from Satan, but essentially the summary of that vision kind of still is hanging over chapter 5. And so Eliphaz saying, call now, right? This vision, he talks about, can mortal men be right with God? And this God who judges even the angels. It's almost like Eliphaz does the, when he says call now, he does the ancient equivalent of the mic drop, right? Like, here's my vision. I've got the authority. So like, what are you going to say here, Job? Right. So, but there is like a little bit of that truth in that vision, this idea of like, who can be right with God. It kind of, echoes a little bit of the all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, kind of from the New Testament, this Romans 3:23 verse. But I think in some ways, like, Eliphaz sort of distills down God's character to only a God of justice. And that's really what his vision was sort of leading to. And that's sort of what I think chapter 5 will then move forward into, this idea of there's a God and he's a God of justice. And that's the God that I'm going to base this solution for this problem that you're facing on. Like, how do we appeal to this God of justice so you can solve this problem of your suffering? He sort of does injustice to God himself, right, in some ways. And I think this first verse where he says, who are you going to call upon? Which of these heavenly hosts? He's not wrong. There's only God himself. But I think you have to have that sort of, what did that vision say? And what is he going to say moving forward in Job 5 that was based on that? And that's going to sort of, I think, speak to the rest of his words here. But that was sort of, I thought verse 1 was interesting in that way.
Yeah, I really appreciate you providing that context. I forgot to include Eliphaz's vision in the little summary at the outset of this. So
It's okay.
you've proven to be a very effectual partner in this study so far. And yeah. So I couldn't have said it better, what you just said there. So if we can move on to the second verse. For wrath killeth the foolish man, and envy slayeth the silly one. So my understanding of this line is that Eliphaz advises Job to accept his punishment and sin rather than persisting in his claim of innocence. Mm-hmm. Not acknowledging his folly will only bring more destruction.
I would agree with that. I think that's essentially what he's saying. Yeah.
Yeah. And, the more that he persists, I think what Eliphaz is saying, right, is the more that you persist in this, you're going to get more judgment from heaven.
Right.
I think the thing that's very curious, and you alluded to this because I mentioned it in the analysis of chapter 4, because I found that dissertation from, I believe, the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. I believe that's what it was from, where it was contemplating that this dream, this vision that Eliphaz is having. I'm going to get to it here in the 5th chapter, but if you don't know what happens in the end, you're like, okay, that sounds like a pretty legit vision, right? Because it's the vision is leading him to go on these very holy lectures of Job about how, like, Job is elevating himself above God, saying that, like, God has made a mistake, that he couldn't possibly have done anything to deserve what he's experiencing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that dissertation contemplates, well, if Eliphaz truly had a vision from God, why does God rebuke Eliphaz later in Job? So that raises an interesting question about where the vision's even coming from and if it has a satanic origin. But the things that Eliphaz is saying seem to sound like good Bible preaching. I mean, it's hard not to disagree with him, right?
Right. And I think this is where the difficulty comes in, because if you've never read this book before, you're sort of reading along and you're like, you know what? He's glorifying God. He's saying God is a good God. He's saying God is all powerful. He judges rightly. He's a just God. Those are all true, right? So I guess the question is, I know that Southern Baptist dissertation suggested an origin of that vision, but then another I would say another suggestion, could it possibly also be that it is a right vision, but it's interpreted dimly in some way, interpreted in a limited way, or in a way that is incorrect, right? In a way that brings down that that rebuke from God Himself, right? So could that also be happening? But either way, there is that rebuke that we know is coming for this solution that Eliphaz is providing to Job, or this. You can call it a worldview, or this view of how the universe functions, or God Himself functions. So,
yeah, and I think we'll have to always kind of keep this in mind as we journey through Job. Like, I know that rebuke is coming, but to be honest, off the top of my head, Jane, I don't remember the exact phrasing of the rebuke. So this dissertation that you're familiar with and that I discovered, I only read the abstract, right? I haven't considered all the different options. Like you're suggesting that the vision could have been true, but the interpretation could have been bad. And maybe that is the nature of the rebuke that occurs later on in the book, which I could obviously look up, and that we'll get to it when we get to it, but I'm thinking about this in the back of my mind, and maybe God rebukes him for other reasons. But I think it's interesting to consider that if the source of the vision is a satanic one, what does it mean that even a satanic vision could lead Eliphaz to sound like a church tent revivalist, right? Like, is that potentially an indictment of that way of preaching? Does it not capture the nuance and the ambiguity of this mysterious realm that we find ourselves in?
I think we're all fallible, right? I think there's a humility that we all need to put on as we sort of open God's Word and try to discuss it even here in a context like this. But what we do know of Satan, right, is that he's the great deceiver, right, the liar. And he'll do it very cunningly. And you see that in Genesis, right? When he speaks to Eve, there's a grain of truth in what he says. Yes, you'll have knowledge, right? But he deceives, right? And he adds on to God's law. And there's subtle ways that he distorts truth. And so I think there is something to be said about really like humbly seeking wisdom and praying through like God's word and asking the Spirit to really reveal the true meaning and truth, right? So that we don't misinterpret it. And if we do, that we don't misinterpret it for too long, right? So
that's interesting. I mean, you could do this opens up a whole dissertation of our own about the nature of dream interpretation in the Bible, because dream interpretation is like a major thing, right? I think what's kind of interesting, one of the ways that modern psychology has been very effective is either to get people to not take their dreams seriously or to interpret them in such a way that they're all like sublimated libido or something, right? But it's actually a very religious practice to kind of understand the symbolic nature of the dreams that are given to us. And I don't know. I don't know what the encounter with Eliphaz reveals about the methodology for like divine interpretation.
right.
I don't know. I'm sure there's a lot to wring out from it. I'm giving that as an opportunity for someone to write upon this. I don't know if I'm going to figure it out.
I don't know if I can either. We can agree upon that.
So let's move on to the third. Yeah, let's move on to the third verse.
Sounds good. Shall I read it?
Yeah, you read it.
Okay. I have seen the foolish taking root, but suddenly I cursed his habitation.
So what do you got for that one?
I think it adds more weight to his argument that he's about to present in deeper sort of words, but it sort of says, okay, I've seen this, right? I know that, it's sort of him just talking about what's going on in reality, right? The foolish may prosper, they may not, but there is a curse upon them. I don't know. What were your thoughts?
Well, I think I understood generally what it meant. The thing that intrigued me was this, but suddenly I cursed his habitation. The word cursed, I thought that was, my mind, I have sort of a proclivity towards the occult. Not that I practice the occult, but I'm sensitive to it. And the concept of cursing is something that I think the modern Christian mind struggles to understand. So I dug a little bit into this. What is this? What's going on here? I curse his habitation. What does that even mean? And so I reviewed some of the commentaries, and I wrote, I think what Eliphaz is trying to say is that foolish people seem to prosper in the temporal occasionally. However, it is short-lived because they have built their foundations on really nothing. What is potentially problematic or intriguing about this scripture is him saying, I curse his habitation. Is he saying he cursed the foolish? And so the commentators try to explain this a couple different ways, and I included the following from Matthew Poole's commentary, where cursing is sort of understood to be judge or perceived, not sort of like this magical incantation that was done over his habitation. I judged that he was a cursed creature, notwithstanding all his prosperity, and I foresaw and foretold it by the rules of Scripture, some to that effect. Or I saw and perceived by the event which followed his prosperity that he was a man accursed of God. For he speaks not in these words of what his estate constantly was, even in the midst of his happiness, though even then he was really accursed, but of what it was by a sudden change. So if there is cursing going on, it's a cursing happening by God. So I suppose these explanations work, but they seem to sidestep the real action that Eliphaz is relating. And like I said, it could be to merely judge, but what if it did mean something more occult? And I do suppose that judge fits better here with our traditional understanding. But if Eliphaz is receiving visions, not from God, right, as entertained previously, then maybe something else is at work. But the commentators say that it's like, oh, I'm judging that this person has not structured their life correctly, and it's only a matter of time before they get, they get it revoked from them, either in the temporal or the eternal sense. You know me, just making a mountain out of a molehill. There are other instances in the Bible.
Absolutely. I would definitely agree with that.
And there's curses upon, right? Like even here, we're struggling with the concept of whether or not man can be perfect and righteous and just, or like where, is that true, or is there the taint of original sin? That's something that I struggled with. I've been struggling with this throughout. It's like Job doesn't seem to be aware of this concept of the genetic transmutation of sin from Adam and Eve. I'm not trying to fault him. It just doesn't seem to be in the mind of the writers of the book yet. It doesn't seem to be codified into doctrine yet. And that's a curse.
It's still part of, the Hebrew interpretation, right, of the Torah, this Old Testament, which is what Job is a part of. And so some of their commentaries are also kind of intriguing because they do talk about that they don't see this from the Christian point of view in the sense of on this side of Jesus's cross, right? Where we know that Christ is that solution to that mystery of suffering. But it's interesting. I haven't really looked into it. I'm no scholar. We both know this. But I think this concept of verse 3, where he talks about cursed, and those different interpretations that you presented, Luke, I think they're really, at least for me, I thought they were clarified in verse 4. So in the next verse, I think there's some phrasing that he uses that really emphasizes or could go along with the idea of it actually being more of a judgment. And the reason I would say that is, and I'll go ahead and read verse 4 if you don't mind. It says, "His children are far from safety, and they are crushed at the gate. Neither is there any to deliver them." And it was the reference to the gate that really stuck out to me. Because throughout the Bible, when they talk about the gate, particularly in the Old Testament, it's sort of this place where the elders and the wise men of the city sort of gathered. And it was this place of business, right? And this place of legal transactions. And you see this in the book of Ruth, where Boaz establishes himself as that, kinsman redeemer. It's alluded to in the Proverbs, in Proverbs 31, where the husband of the Proverbs 31 wife really is sitting at the city gate. But elsewhere also. But specifically, the idea of the gate, and I know we don't want to jump ahead too much, but it's mentioned again twice in Job. Once later on, when Job is talking about his role at the gate, where he literally did just that, where he was one of those elder wise men who, helped judge and helped these legal issues get resolved. But then it's the second instance that gate is mentioned in Job, and that's where God mentions it in his voice from the whirlwind. And he talks about the gate as in the context of the gates of hell and heaven, and that's also a place of judgment, right? So there's this connotation of a gate and this idea of justice and judgment happening at this place. And so this place of justice kind of ties back into, Eliphaz, cursing his habitation, or even earlier in his vision where God is judging even the angels, right? God is this God who is a judge. He's this God of justice and potentially justice alone, as this primary part of his character. And so I sort of saw it like that. Well, how did you see verse 4?
Well, I didn't go too deep into it. Not that it can't be drilled down on like you just have. I mean, I the expression "and they are crushed in the gate" jumped out at me as well. I didn't think about it like you. I just kind of thought that Eliphaz was continuing to analogize the fate of such wicked men that he believes Job probably is. So I didn't do what you did, but I'm glad that you did what you did.
Well, I think you had pointed out the whole crushed at the gates initially, and I was like, oh, okay, that does stand out. Definitely appreciate that.
So I'll have to tuck that away and come back to it.
So much to come back to. But go ahead, I'll let you read verse 5.
Whose harvest the hungry eateth up, and taketh it even out of the thorns, and the robber swalloweth up their substance. Again, I thought this was a continuation of the prognostication about, or the analogization of Job with wicked men. I didn't have anything super substantive to add to it. Although the next line, although affliction cometh not forth of the dust, neither doth trouble spring out of the ground. I thought this was interesting, and hopefully I'm not jumping too far ahead here. But the idea here seems to be that affliction does not arise by chance, but the commentators seem to diverge as to the cause of this affliction. So some say it is the result of God's design, and others say it is because we have chosen preconditions for our own affliction. And it obviously could be both, which opens a massive conversation up concerning free will. So there's nothing going to be left to chance about affliction. Either God has predestinated this affliction for us. It's not like, oh, it just evolved out of the dust, out of this primordial soup that we find ourselves in, or we have personally laid the groundwork for our own ravishing via pestilence or any other sort of trial.
That's so interesting. I hadn't thought of the predestination or aspect of any of this. I was still sort of thinking of verse 5 and 6 along the themes of justice and injustice, right? Where 5, he defines injustice, right? According to Eliphaz and his view of God and his view of justice and injustice, verse 5 basically speaks of what is unjust. Those whose harvest, the hungry eateth up, And then verse 6, this is where he kind of goes into a reason for Job's affliction, right? This is your reason. There is, injustice has a source. And when I say injustice, I mean injustice as Job claims it to be, right?
And Eliphaz is saying it's perfectly just.
Exactly.
Either it's coming from God's schema from eternity, or Job deserves exactly what is happening to him because of some secret sin.
Right.
So, I don't think these are mutually exclusive. You're talking about justice and injustice. I'm talking about free will and predestination. It's not just that predestination is some sort of metaphysical construct. It involves the concept of justice in it. I think that's what the most, I don't know exactly what I am. I mean, I'm probably some sort of compatibilist. I've gone through the entire Bible and, does this verse support free will? Does this verse support predestination? It seems to be about a 40-60 split to me. And I think it's entirely possible that, I'm not trying to lead anybody astray here, but that mix might be different for different folks here. I don't know.
Yeah, and I would agree with that too. I don't know if I ever got to the point of creating percentages or anything, but I do know that both are true, and how both are true and coexist is that part of that divine mystery of God Himself, I think. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm okay. Personally, I think I'm okay with everything being completely predestinated, but us feeling as if we have the freedom of the will. But that's a much larger conversation. Like I think there was a time in my life. I think there was a time in my life when, the feeling of free will was not enough to satisfy my sense of how the universe ought to be structured. Where I am now is like, if that's the way the universe is structured, I can live with it and accept it and submit to it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a larger conversation. We've had small snippets of that conversation in the past, you and I, but maybe not for here.
So I'll go ahead and read 7 and 8. Yet man is born unto trouble, and the sparks fly upward. So I thought this was a great line. Yet man is born unto trouble as the sparks fly upward. The idea here seems to be that affliction. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. That was previously. I would say that born hints at God's intentions with affliction and the curse of original sin. I feel like we have gotten mixed messages about Job and original sin so far in the text. I mentioned this earlier, going off my notes. Does Job have it and is rightly afflicted, Or is he as perfect as a man can be, and his affliction does not match the base level affliction for someone suffering from original sin? So that's what that got me going. The rabbit hole that got me going down.
Yeah, I think I was on a similar vein. This idea that, Eliphaz is saying, Job, you're not blameless, right? You're not special. You're not blameless. Stop saying that you are, essentially. And
does he have blame as being a member of the human species, or does he have blame because of something that he's hiding? Even from himself, maybe even from his consciousness. He's not even aware that he's doing it.
I don't know if it matters to Eliphaz, though. Does it?
Well, I mean, those are two really different things, right?
They are. I agree with you.
Right. Like, let me just sketch this out a little bit. So none of us can help being born. And at the bare minimum, as being mortal creatures, our punishment is death. Okay? I guess the question is did Job need to experience something so catastrophic for being a mortal creature? Like, why couldn't he just get some sort of, get some sort of disease and die normally, right? Why does he have to experience such an elaborate personal catastrophe? That doesn't seem to be in correspondence with the base level of genetic transmission of sin. I'm not judging these things, but it seems like for him to experience such a personal catastrophe that he's done something else besides exist as a member of humanity. That's what I think the tension is and what the difference could possibly be.
I see. Okay, so the degree to which the suffering is occurring.
We're all supposed to suffer, but not suffer like this. You must have done something really bad.
Yeah, you could be absolutely right. I actually hadn't really thought about that. I do think it's interesting that he talks about yet man is born into trouble. And in Job 3, when Job himself is he speaks finally, and he speaks of his, and it's a lament. And he goes back and laments that he didn't die after being born. He's not suicidal. He's not wishing to die or trying to die. It's almost as if he wants to go back to a point of his life where he can be right with God and not have maybe unconsciously sinned somehow. And this idea that would probably occur at that point in his life when he was that young, maybe, I don't know. But it's interesting. I do like the sparks fly upward phrase. I thought that was pretty interesting. I don't know how you interpreted that one, but I thought of it as this God knows all, right? Everything always gets known. So.
Yeah. Also, I mean, look, I think it foreshadows the concept of. I'm not. No one else said this, but just looking at it again now with you, it sort of foreshadows the idea of our of our spirits potentially reconnecting with God, right? Yeah. When we go through after going through this trial that is life,
right?
Once we've been liberated from the matter. This fiery spirit ascending upwards. I'm not saying that's what the writer of this intended, but just meditating on it a little bit more, I see it sort of cinematically, foreshadowing the idea of reunification with God.
Interesting. Okay, so verse 8.
Well, I will say, can I say this? Can I say this? I don't have much for verses 8 through 19. I covered what I wanted to say about that, the tension between Eliphaz's inspiration, like in regards to his dream, and how what he says sounds plausible from, say, like an evangelical preaching perspective. I think we've covered that already, so I don't necessarily need to interject that. If you wanted to just straight read all the way to 19 and offer your commentary, I think that'd be fine.
Okay. So I had a couple thoughts about verse 8. And so this is Eliphaz speaking, and he says, verse 8, I would seek unto God, and unto God I would commit my cause. And I found this very, very funny in the sense that it's sort of like, well, this is what I would do, Job, if I were you. I would commit my cause. And so that phrase, commit my cause, was actually interesting to me. I don't know what your thoughts were on that, Luke, if you had any.
My understanding of it was that he is going to completely humble himself and admit that he's got some personal failing that he's not even acknowledging, rather than turn to the saints or plead with God directly that some mistake has been made in this trial.
Right.
But that's not saying that there isn't something deeper there. Like, you picked up on it, and I didn't have much to say about, and they are crushed in the gate. You had this whole backstory to it that I missed out on. So there could be much more there that didn't jump out at me. I spent a few hours on this a week. So, I mean, there's obviously layers of this that I'm going to miss.
Commit my cause really stood out to me in the sense that, and disclaimer, I'm no Hebrew scholar, so I don't know how any of this translates from the original at all. But it does, this exact phrase does show up in other places in the Old Testament. And there was two specific places, and they're both in the book of Jeremiah, and they're both in the context of the prophet seeking a righteous judge. And it's so interesting that phrase is used for Jeremiah seeking this righteous judge for what he sees as again, injustice, right? He's appealing to this God of justice, and he uses that phrase in both of those situations. And so in Jeremiah, so I thought that was interesting, and it sort of went along with that theme of justice and injustice, and this idea of Eliphaz seeing God as a God of justice, right? There's not much room for the merciful God in his view, or that loving, that steadfast love God kind of idea. But that was sort of my thought on verse 8. But I'll go ahead and read verse 9 through 18. So verse 9, which doeth great things and unsearchable, marvelous things without number. So he's talking about God, right? So who giveth rain upon the earth and sendeth waters upon the fields, to set up on high those that be low, that those which mourn may be exalted to safety. He disappointeth the devices of the crafty, so that their hands cannot perform their enterprise. He taketh the wise in their own craftiness, and the counsel of the forward he carried headlong. They meet with darkness in the daytime, and grope in the noonday as in the night. But he saveth the poor from the sword, and from their mouth, and from the hand of the mighty. So the poor hath hope, and iniquity stoppeth her mouth. Behold, happy is the man whom God correcteth. Therefore despise not thou the chastening of the Almighty. For he maketh sore, and bindeth up. He woundeth, and his hand makes whole. So I thought that whole section was really, really poetic. And so I don't have a whole lot of commentary for the rest of this either, but this section from verse 9 through 18, apart from that beginning where he sort of sets up from his, this is the reason that I can talk about this because I had this vision, right? And here's my view of how things are actually occurring for you, Job. And then verse 9 through 18, poetically, he sets forth this character of his God of justice, right? This is the God of justice, right? He saveth the poor from the sword, right? And all of this. And then verse 19 through 26, do you want to read that?
But if we can just
You want to add to that?
dwell here a little bit longer. So if I can translate it into the parlance of our time, right? Job needs to submit to God and to confess that he is not as upright and perfect as he thinks he is, right? And that there must be some sort of hidden problem, or maybe not so hidden, maybe something he's just not acknowledging externally to everyone else, and that he should be thankful for this opportunity to be refined, sifted, and have it removed from him through this judgment and this punishment that is being administered to him via Satan with the permission of God. So that's what we know. I don't know if Eliphaz knows that. I don't think Eliphaz has access to the agent that is inflicting this punishment upon Job. So that, when we find ourselves in, air quotes, cursed scenarios, it's a blessing to further the cause of purification, right? I think that's one thing that Eliphaz is saying here. Or if you truly are one of these downtrodden, terrible, pathetic souls, I don't mean that in a derogatory way, just like one of the good innocents that come upon unfortunate circumstances, you need not to be in anguish because God will ultimately perform this miraculous turning of the tables and set everything right. That's what I understand there from that speech. Do I have that correct?
I think I would agree with what you're saying in the sense that it makes sense. I think that's essentially what he's saying.
Yeah, so, again, we have this issue where Eliphaz seems to be saying true things, but perhaps drawing from an inauthentic source of inspiration. And I think this raises an interesting question: is like, does God really work that way? Does God really refine us through suffering? Is that what we need to believe in order to be subscribers of this religion? And do we also need to believe that temporally God will always make things right? Or are those things that we tell ourselves? I mean, they sound good, but, Job, does Job fall into one of these categories? I guess he would be, or both of these categories.
I don't know. I think we're going to find out a little bit more about Job and where he is as he starts to speak more in some of these later chapters. And I think some of that will get a little bit more fleshed out. But I mean, I do believe that, suffering is real. Everyone suffers to some degree.
But is the suffering for the point of our spiritual refinement, to slough off our sinful ways?
I think it can be. It can be, but it's sort of. I hesitate. I hesitate to put God in that box and say, well, that's why it's always happening, right? Or anything.
Right, because then that would, if that were the case, right? Like you and I both know from the, this is a book of the Bible in the Old Testament, right?
Right.
So Christ has not entered the picture yet, right? So you and I both know that from a New Testament perspective, one cannot suffer your way into heaven or suffer your way into purity, right?
Right.
Like that's not how the salvific game is played. Like that's why we don't, inflict suffering upon ourselves to expedite this process, right?
Right.
So I think it raises an interesting question about whether or not this could have been the way the air quotes game, I'm just using this, the schema, the metaphysical chutes and ladders of everything was played during this period of the Old Testament, but that's not how it's done in the New Testament. Because then we have a scenario that kind of sets up the possibility of people earning their way into purity.
Right. There was a system of sacrifices. Even in Job 1, Job was making sacrifices for his children, right? He was saying, well, in case that they have, somehow sinned against God, I will offer these sacrifices on their behalf. And so there is this idea of always, and I think at the root of that sacrifice is this acknowledgement of God being God himself, right? Like God is always present, and acknowledging all things in our lives are dependent on our Creator in that way. And those things are true in the New Testament as well, except Christ was our sacrifice, right? And so the deeds aren't necessary in the same way. We do them out of love for God himself, and that's sort of how that is viewed on this side of the cross, I think.
It's interesting thinking about this stuff. The little bit of commentary that I've read on this is how often Job is compared to Christ, or as a type of prefiguration of Christ. And I wonder how that affects our interpretation of what's going on here. Obviously it's not a Christophany, right? We're not, but this whole concept of him being perfect, it does make me wonder why that analogy is drawn. What's going on here? Like who really is Job?
Yeah, and I think you're getting at some really deep theological, eschatological, all sorts of interesting questions about this book in particular, which has it has baffled many scholars who spent their lives on studying the Bible in the original languages and such. And so I don't know the answer. I hadn't really thought of it that way. I know that there are other people in the Bible that in the Old Testament that are considered prefigurations of Christ, and probably have more stronger data to sort of back that up in some ways. I don't know.
Yeah, it raises an interesting question about what a prefiguration is. Are they just like a hint of what is to come, or are they actually an incarnation of it? Right? Like some people claim that Melchizedek, right? Is that how you say his name? Melchizedek, the high priest of Salem, was actually an instantiation of Christ.
Right. That's actually who I was thinking of as well.
So, it's so interesting. People go, oh, they think they've got Christianity all figured out, or that it's boring, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, hey, you just spend a little bit of time on the details and things get really mysterious very quickly. It's not black and white.
It's not black and white. And yet every time I read this, I feel like, I don't know, God reveals more and more, right, of himself. And I don't know about you, but it strengthens my faith every time. So,
well, I have to do this. I explore some pretty strange subjects, so I need all the protection I can get.
Do you want to read the next several verses?
Yeah, I really only had one more thing to add here, and it was a numerological issue. Mm-hmm. So verse 19, he shall deliver thee in 6 troubles, yea, in 7, there shall no evil touch thee. So if you've been following along since the beginning, you will know that that there's a pattern here. I don't know exactly what the pattern is, but the 7 keeps showing up. And we established earlier that 7 was a number of completion. And if that's the case, this would make 6 something like an indefinite number. Barnes' note on the Bible, I included this. He writes, "He shall deliver thee in 6 troubles." 6 is used here to denote an indefinite number, meaning that he would support in many troubles. This mode of speech is not uncommon among the Hebrews, where one number is mentioned so that an extreme number may be immediately added. So I guess the idea here is the 7, the number of completion, would be added so that you could add in the 6. The method is to mention a number within the limit and then to add one more, meaning that in all instances, the thing referred to would occur. The limit here is 7, with the Hebrew as a complete and perfect number. And the idea is that in any succession of troubles, however numerous, God was able to deliver. So I don't know if it's a complete mathematical interpretation of what's happening here, but the idea is that the troubles will eventually come to an end because there is a limit to them. God won't let it go on forever.
Mm-hmm. I thought verse 19 was interesting. I didn't have specific thoughts on the number that you picked up on, because I thought that's very interesting that you did that. But I picked up on the fact that this was a turning point in Eliphaz's speech, in the sense that he turns from this God of justice and who God is and says, okay, this is what he will do for thee. And so this is now directed, and I think the next several verses are what will happen to Job should he basically do what Eliphaz tells him, which is, appeal to God himself.
Well, why don't you read us out, because they hear enough of me already, and I like listening to you.
All right. He shall deliver thee in 6 troubles, yea, in 7 there shall no evil touch thee. In famine he shall redeem thee from death, and in war from the power of the sword. Thou shalt be hid from the scourge of the tongue, neither shalt thou be afraid of destruction when it cometh. At destruction and famine thou shalt laugh, neither shalt thou be afraid of the beasts of the earth. For thou shalt be in league with the stones of the field, and the beasts of the field shall be at peace with thee. And thou shalt know that thy tabernacle shall be in peace, and thou shalt visit thy habitation, and shalt not sin. Thou shalt know also that thy seed shall be great, and thine offspring as the grass of the earth. Thou shalt come to thy grave in a full age, like as a shock of corn cometh in his season. And so I thought that was so interesting. He went from, here you are in your troubles, and so I will give you a vision of everything that will happen to you up until you die, and even then you'll be blessed, right? So again, this is the personalization part of this. I thought was very interesting to kind of hammer in his argument to Job. Like, let me appeal to you personally and tell you what will happen if you actually listen to me and heed my words and appeal to this God of justice that I'm telling you about. And so again, these are the great and marvelous things God will do for Job.
And there's one more verse, 27. Lo, this, we have searched it, so it is, hear it, and know thou it for thy good. Listening to you read this back, I got to admire it a little bit more. And the line that jumped out at me, that I thought, not only is this great writing, but also conjures up a pretty phantasmagorical picture in my mind. For thou shalt be in league with the stones of the field, and the beasts of the field shall be at peace with thee. And I like this idea of like all of nature, like God and all of nature, even the rocks, like conspiring with you. Like, I think there's some element to this. Like I think we see just being brought into harmony with nature it calls to mind the millennial kingdom idea of the lion laying down with the lamb and things coming into harmony. I thought that was a really good line.
Yeah. And the more I think about this, because again, hearing you say that, this idea of harmony with nature, but and then kind of coming back to this last verse, verse 27, and lo, we have searched it, right? And know thou it for thy good. For thy good, that phrase really stuck out to me as well. What is good for man? What is that for thy good? According to Eliphaz, it is this, pastoral vision of, this new Eden that Job will experience. And I don't know. And maybe this will become clearer as we sort of go through the next few chapters and the rest of the book. But, what is for thy good? What does that actually mean in truth? And, how is Job able to solve this mystery of his suffering in a world governed by a good God, right? How does that happen? And is that what Job is even searching for? It seemed to me, even in his lament in chapter 3, he was searching for more than just this level of peace that's being offered. It's almost like he needs to be right with God himself, and he knows that. You see that in his rebuke to his wife, right? Like this idea of not cursing God, like this idea that he wants to be right with God, and so even in this vision of what will happen with Job, it's like you'll get everything restored and life will be, pastorally beautiful, and the beasts will frolic together and sort of things like that. But he doesn't mention Job and God together, right? He doesn't mention like what your relationship with God will be like, and I thought that was missing from that sort of here's what it's going to be for you, Job, and I almost think that that's something that Job wants.
Well, it's an interesting question about what the subjective relationship is between God and man at this stage in the development of the religion. The way that God and man are interacting in the Old Testament, and I don't have a theory here, but it seems depersonalized from the way it is in the New Testament. There's Job is relating to God through that we know of, right? Let's think about this. He does through sacrifice, right? So he's following some sort of legal rights that have been established. Okay. He's doing it through his virtuous behavior. And I think at some point, I mean, he hasn't gone directly to God with his frustration yet.
See, I don't know. I would disagree in some ways a little bit with that. I think there's many.
I'm just talking. No.
It is an interesting question, and this idea of what is God's relationship with man, and is it as distant as we assume prior to Jesus Christ, right? And so, I think there's examples where.
If I can just interject this real quickly.
Yeah.
It does seem like Job, because it seems like God has more of a direct relationship. I hate to say this, I'm not trying to say anything blasphemous. It sounds like from what we've seen so far in just this book, no other context, no prior books or posterior books, just here in Job, it seems like God has more of a direct relationship with Satan and the fallen angels than with Job at this point. He actually holds court with them and seems to have some sort of recognition and acknowledgement with Satan. They have history, and Job is he's almost shown off as like a possession, like a painting or a sculpture or something. I'm not saying that's what he is. I'm just saying that's the vibe at times, depending on the layer of this hyperdimensional matrix we look at.
Well, I mean, he is the creator, right? Yeah. He is the creator. I mean, God is our creator. So in some ways, I mean, you could say it's sort of like showing off a work of art. But at the same time, I think it's also like a father being proud of a son, right? So how do we know that kinship that we see and that relationship in the New Testament where God brings us into his family and calls us sons and daughters through Jesus Christ isn't still there, right? Because he does speak of Job in that sort of loving way. So I don't know. I don't know the answer.
To be determined. So I think we've gone quite a while. And I think initially we had planned to do sort of discussion at the end, but I think we effectively discussed throughout. Were there any issues that we did not address that you'd like to address at this time?
No, I think we've covered a lot. So this is quite the discussion. Yeah.
I think people have a lot to mull over. So, all right, let's bring it to a close there. And I hope for all our sakes that Jane will come back and do this again. I'll see if I can convince her to do it. So thank you, Jane.
No, thank you.